Meanwhile, President Trump is vowing to take back the Capitol. That announcement made in a highly anticipated press conference at the White House earlier this morning. The president took to that podium to outline his plan to crack down on crime in his own backyard and says he plans to do that with the help of the National Guard. Listen to him talk about why he decided to put those boots on the ground on the streets of D.C.
I'm announcing a historic action to rescue our nation's capital from crime, bloodshed, bedlam, and squalor, and worse. This is Liberation Day in D.C., and we're going to take our capital back. I'm deploying the National Guard to help reestablish law, order, and public safety in Washington, D.C., and they're going to be allowed to do their job properly. And you people are victims of it, too. You know, you're reporters, and I understand a lot of you tend to be on the liberal side, but you don't want to get mugged and raped and shot and killed. And you all know people and friends of yours that happened. And so you can be anything you want, but you want to have safety in the streets. You want to be able to leave your apartment or your house where you live and feel safe and go into a store to buy a newspaper or buy something. And you don't have that now.
Okay, so let's take a look at the numbers from the Metropolitan Police Department. As of Friday, homicides are actually down 12% compared to last year. Robberies are down 28%, and total violent crime is down 26%. We have team coverage on this. Standing by for us is CBS News Justice reporter Jake Rosen. But first, let's go to CBS News White House reporter Willie James Inman. Willie, the numbers don't lie, and they show crime in the city is actually declining. Now, despite that, the president insists crime numbers are getting worse. So what stood out to you during his press conference earlier today?
Yeah, that's right, Liz. As you perfectly pointed out, violent crime is down here in the District of Columbia, according to the Metropolitan Police Department, those statistics that you showed there. But nonetheless, the president making this push, calling about an emergency order, essentially taking control of the Metropolitan Police Department. Now, that starts a process, a notification process to Congress, which essentially would mean that he would have to outline the reasons why he is doing this within the next 48 hours. Then it allows the president to move forward and continue controlling through the Department of Justice, Attorney General Pam Bondi, who he has really put in charge here of doing that, to maintain control of the Metropolitan Police Department for up to 30 days. And then he would get the buy-in of Congress. We, of course, know that Congress is controlled by the Republicans, so we could perhaps win that argument there. But the president talked about a couple of different situations and crimes that happen in the district as the reason why he is doing this. Take a listen to what he said earlier.
A Democrat congressman was also carjacked at gunpoint not far from the Capitol. And in 2023, an aide to Senator Rand Paul was stabbed in the chest and head by a demented lunatic as he walked down the street, just absolutely for no reason. Horrifically, last July 4th weekend, a 3-year-old girl was shot in the head and killed while sitting in a car near the Capitol. It's becoming a situation of complete and total lawlessness. And we're getting rid of the slums, too. We have slums here. We're getting rid of them.
Now, the president is also targeting homeless encampments as well. And he pointed out the murder rate using these White House figures there. He tried to compare the murder rate of D.C. To other capitals around the world. Now, it's worth pointing out that some of these other capitals, some of these other countries will perhaps have different gun laws. But still, nonetheless, the president calling about this emergency power, taking control of the Metropolitan Police Department. We now know that some 800 members of the D.C. National Guard are going to be deploying throughout the streets of D.C. in large part to just simply have a presence as a deterrent for criminal activity in the district. Over the weekend, more than 400 federal law enforcement personnel deployed throughout the district to have that maintain that presence as well to deter crime. But this is a major move by this president, despite crime being lower, violent crime, I should say, being lowered than what we saw last year, Liz.
Yeah, Willie, another moment that stood out to me from the press conference was when D.C.'s newly top prosecutor, Jeanine Pirro, took to the mic, and she talked about cracking down on crime committed by teenagers, people under the age of 18. So what did she say about that?
Yeah, that's right. In fact, she was just over my shoulder here just moments ago talking to some folks here on the White House North Lawn after doing an interview. This is in large part a focus on teenagers, those individuals under 18 committing violent crimes or carjackings in the district. Now, the newly minted U.S. Attorney for the District of Columbia essentially said that she can't touch some of these cases because if it doesn't involve murder or extreme violent crimes like rape, she can't touch them. She said some changes need to be made there. Now, this has been a local issue where you have some of these individuals who are quite young, anywhere between the ages of 12 and 17, committing some of these crimes, committing carjackings. And the criticism here, in large part, is focused on the Attorney General of the District of Columbia, who critics say is unwilling to go after some of these juveniles, unwilling to try them as adults. Essentially, critics will point out saying that they get a slap on the wrist after committing some of these crimes. So that is part of the focus here, at least from the White House, hoping to make some changes, but in large part hoping to send a message not only throughout the district, but around the country to those other cities that the president is willing to take this extreme move, this move to call about those emergency powers to essentially lower crime here in the district, although statistics will point out that crime is much lower than we have seen in recent years, Liz.
CBS News White House reporter Willie James Inman. Thank you so much, Willie. Good to see you. All right, let's lean into this story a little bit more and bring in CBS News Justice reporter Jake Rosen. Jake, what were your key takeaways from the president's announcement to deploy the National Guard to the streets of D.C.?
Well, certainly the big takeaway here is obviously what President Trump has done earlier in his term in relation to law enforcement and the Capitol area. I think it's hard to ignore the fact that President Trump did pardon hundreds, if not thousands, of people who were convicted or charged for their actions on January 6, 2021. And President Trump, Pete Hegseth, Defense Secretary, Attorney General Pam Bondi all spoke about, a warning that these troops, needed to be respected when they're in Washington, D.C. And I think, we saw obviously many law enforcement officials get attacked on that day, and their assaulters were then pardoned by this administration, and in some cases actually hired by them. I don't think you rule that out in the context of what we're seeing now. And in addition to that, it's just, the expansion of what we saw in Los Angeles a couple of months ago by bringing in the National Guard to actually quell some unrest there in very, particular street corners and neighborhoods where ICE activity was happening. Now the Trump administration is applying that model to an entire city where there certainly is not nearly the amount of unrest. There's not burning of vehicles or mass protests going on here in D.C., although President Trump does have a limited but real authority of how he can do this. So certainly it looks like the Washington, D.C. police will be under President Trump and the Attorney General Pam Bondi for the next 48 hours at least, unless Congress steps in to give him more time and authority overseeing them. And our colleagues at the Pentagon are reporting that 800 members of the National Guard are being brought in under Title 32, which would allow them potentially to have some arrest authority. But are those law enforcement officers going to be moved to neighborhoods, and we've reported this over the weekend as well, including the FBI and a number of other law enforcement? Are they going to go to places like the National Mall, where they're filled with tourists, going to museums, the parks throughout the city, of which there are many, especially used by local residents here constantly, or are they going to go to the areas of the city that maybe tourists wouldn't go to, where a lot of that crime is actually located and where it occurs?
Now, it's important to note, Jake, that D.C. police officers have been in their own fight for more funding. Can you walk us through what's going on there?
Yeah, and there's been a lot of local criticism, not just aimed at the White House, but aimed at all of Congress in the last couple of weeks, because we know that one big beautiful bill actually cut tens of millions of dollars that would be used to backfill local police officers here in Washington, D.C., and to fund public safety initiatives. That money that strips money to major cities across the country, but specifically D.C., because it gets a lot of its budget from Capitol Hill and these annual budget packages, that money was stripped out. Lawmakers said that they would go back and fix that that after the bill was signed. That hasn't happened yet. So currently there's a big tranche of money, as President Trump spoke at length about the number of D.C. police officers. Well, it's very hard to hire them if the budget is completely slashed for some of these positions. Obviously, in addition to that, whether these law enforcement officials who are brought in are actually going to, again, go to these areas that need it and police the areas of which there's crime, or to just simply be a photo op, of which you can see some of these pictures throughout the weekend, where really there were federal law enforcement operating in areas where there really is not a lot of people outside of tourists during the day, but really a lot of crime even at night.
CBS News Justice reporter Jake Rosen. Thanks so much, Jake. All right, let's go into more about this. Let's go to CBS News senior coordinating producer for the Crime and Public Safety Unit, Anna Schecter. Anna, great to see you. The president says the capital city has been taken over by violent gangs and criminals. Can you walk us through the numbers here, the crime statistics, and how it relates to other cities across the United States?
Well, sure. It's a great question because Washington, D.C. is tracking along national trend lines where we saw a spike in violent crime post-COVID, particularly in D.C. in 2023. But then that murder rate, aggravated assault, those kinds of crimes have been dropping last year and then also in the first half of 2025. So a lot of good news in terms of these trends. And you saw at the press conference, the FBI director, Kash Patel, even said so. He talked about the murder rate dropping and being at historic lows for the first part of this year, which was sort of the opposite of what President Trump was describing. He is an expert at tapping into people's kind of emotions in terms of fears and the like. So we've had several high-profile crimes around the country, but particularly two in Washington, D.C., including a DOJ employee who was attacked in the midst of a carjacking. Now, carjacking numbers have been pretty high in D.C. They really did spike also in 2023. They are coming down, but that rate has not come down to pre-pandemic levels yet, but the trend is on the positive side, whereas murders really are down and aggravated assault, violent crimes are down, approaching pre-pandemic levels. And if the numbers so far this year continue, we'll be hitting likely those levels. So good news. And, if we look in historic context, think about the early 90s. The murder rate in Washington, D.C. was extremely high, way higher than even what we saw in 2023. So just a little bit of historic context, of course. Families and citizens want to have safe streets for their children. So President Trump was tapping into that in that very lengthy press conference that we all watched earlier today. Liz.
And Anna, what would complete federal control over the Metropolitan Police Department look like? Would there still be police officers patrolling the streets, or would it just be the National Guard?
Well, President Trump seemed to indicate that he wants to lean into the 3,000 or so local police officers who work at Metro PD. And what he said was that he wanted to empower them to be able to do their jobs. And in fact, this reflects what he put in an executive order earlier this year in March, essentially rolling back mechanisms for people to file lawsuits against law enforcement officers for things that they did in the line of duty. He also wanted to free up unused military equipment to go to local police officers. So he's really actually leaning into things he said he would do earlier this year. But I think he's tapping into the sort of zeitgeist right now, especially in the wake of that carjacking and also a congressional intern who was shot and killed in D.C. earlier this year. But, we're doing a lot of fact checking over here. Yes, perception of crime in D.C. and other major cities. People feel like crime is high, but the numbers, at least in the last year, really don't tell that story. We're seeing improvements and really a positive trend with violent crime and auto theft and property crime on the downtrend.
Anna Schecter, thank you so much.